the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, the military side of Chicks in Chainmail. Plus, we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of Timothy Zahn's Cobra, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. This week, to round out 2022, we're bringing you DJ Butler's conversation with editor Jason Cordova about the new Chicks in Chainmail inspired anthology, Chicks in Tank Tops. Joining these gentlemen is Robert E. Hampson, Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, and Marissa Wolf. In just a moment, we'll hear this conversation about one of the most iconic and fun anthology series Baen has ever put out, and about the stories in the latest Inspired By installment. But first, the news. Just in time for the holidays and in honor of last month's release of Penrick's Labors, we're offering discounts on all Baen Lois McMaster Bujold titles, including her groundbreaking Vorkosigan saga, the Penrick and Desdemona novels, standalone novel The Spirit Ring, and more. Head on over to Baen.com to see the full list. These discounts expire at the stroke of midnight as 2022 becomes 2023 and are good wherever Baen ebooks are sold. Looking for the perfect gift this holiday season? Well, look no further. Give the Baen Books lovers in your life what they really want: more Baen books with Baen Books gift cards. You decide the amount, but remember, e-ARCs are $15 a piece. Monthly bundles, $18. Pretty sure they already have everything? Head on over to the Baen Cafe Press Store and check out our wide variety of Baen merchandise with travel mugs, t-shirts, tote bags, hats, and more. There is something for every Baen fan. And don't forget about the Baen Challenge coins. All of this information can be found at Baen.com, and act now while supplies last.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. I'm DJ Dave Butler, and I'm here today to talk with the editor, one of the editors, and several of the writers involved in our Chicks in Tank Tops anthology, out now in trade paperback, and also in all your favorite ebook formats, DRM free when you purchase them at Baen.com. Always, of course. Sharon, Steve, Marissa, Jason. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Jason, we're sad Esther couldn't join us, but we're thrilled to have you. And I'd love to hear from you a background. This is an anthology that has, we get anthologies for lots of reasons. Sometimes we do an anthology because we have a piece of art and we think we'd like to have an anthology that matches with it, or because we want to do an anthology in somebody's setting. This anthology has kind of a pedigree. So tell us about some of the background and how you came by this. Set us up the big picture, Jason.
Okay, so Esther Friesner approached Jim Baen way back in 1980, 89, 90, I don't exactly remember when, about this great idea of Chicks in Chainmail. Sounded awesome. She wanted fantasy, humorous, and that's what she got. And Jim wasn't a little sold on the idea, but Esther, if you've ever met her, is very convincing. And she went ahead and sold the anthology to Baen, and it did amazing. And eventually Jim even got in on the naming process, and five or six anthologies were eventually published. And then they kind of went on a bit of a hiatus for a few years. And then in 2020, the year we all were locked down, I'd gotten into the habit of doing Friday nights. Hey, let's just get on Facebook and be stupid with all our friends, because I haven't seen anybody in a year at that point. And I started joking around because I was reading Thanks for the Memories, which is another Esther title.
But not a Baen collection.
No, that is a Baen one.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
I should have known that.
The cover is amazing.
Mr. is shameless.
Yeah. And I should
I love
say,
that
and
stuff.
she's written an introduction to the anthology, and I won't give it all away. It bears reading. It's entertaining in itself. But her account is that the first Chicks in Chainmail book had a written disclaimer that said the idea and in particular the title were not Jim's idea.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is very funny.
That's awesome.
So we were joking around, and I was listening to this Fall Out Boy song called "Thanks for the Memories," and "Thanks for the Memories," and just clicked in my head. I was like, "Thanks for the memories, thanks for the memories." Oh my God, why did Baen never publish this? This is right up their alley. And I started joking around on Facebook, and then as people are wont to do, they piled on. And then buried down in about midway through the thread, suddenly Tony pops in with, "Pitch this to me." So that's pretty much how Chicks in Tank Tops came about. Although I definitely had to change the title.
So Chicks in Chainmail was fantasy, and the
Yes.
title is tongue in cheek. I have not read that one, but surely some of the stories. I mean, the idea, right? This is Red Sonja and the Chainmail bikini that we saw ubiquitously in the 60s and 70s and whatever.
Because it was Chicks in Chained Mails. The chick is in mail. Turn the other chick. Wow, there's another one too. Chicks Ahoy.
Chicken chain mails.
Yes, Chicks and Chained Mails. Yes,
And that apparently was Jim's title. So we came around.
Full circle.
Okay, but this does not mean though that now some of the stories are individually humorous. In the selection, right? But they aren't all humorous. And by the way,
sorry, when I set forth the requirements, I told all the people I was inviting, I was like, please, I just want a chick, a strong female, and a tank. Everything else is up to you. And the majority of the stories came out science fiction-y, which is great. Actually, the only two fantasy stories were myself and G. Scott Huggins. Everybody else turned in these amazing science fiction stories, so that was great.
Yeah, but some of them are funny, some of them are not. They're some of the female characters in question are children, right? So it's actually quite a gamut. You mentioned Scott Huggins. His story is sort of historical fantasy. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the title is fun, is humorous, right? The cover is very gonzo and fun. The contents actually cover a wide range. They just have there's a female character, and there's a tank, or maybe there's more than one tank, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. I don't know what the right order is to talk about them. Jason, do you is there any preferred story you'd like to start with?
Well, the first one I'll start with the first one that was actually turned in, even though it's not the first story in the anthology. It was Rob Hampson's version story called Mother, and it was a very dark story, and had children and a tank in it, like you said. And Rob, talk about your story for a minute.
Hi, Jason. I'm excited to be part of the Chicks in Tank Tops anthology. My story, Mother, is a feel-good story about motherhood. Right. Actually, the chick in my story is an artificial intelligence named Mother. Mother is a combat nanny installed in the tank of a platoon commander tasked with keeping track of battlefield information, conditions, advising the commander, warning of threats, and overall helping to protect the troops in her charge as they deploy to combat a People's Liberation Army. Unfortunately, Mother is unable to succeed at her job. She can't keep her troops safe and loses the platoon. Her tank is all but destroyed, but is hidden under a collapsed building. As the enemy herds civilians into refugee camps and treats them badly, a few of them find the shelter of the tank, and eventually they reawaken Mother, giving her a new family to protect. Jason, you've often tell folks that Mother is the darkest story in the collection, and you find that somewhat surprising from me, since I'm a hard science writer and a scientist who likes positive outcomes. But actually, Mother comes from a background of writing some realistic military science fiction that projects the future of the battlefield and conditions and how we can use technology and artificial intelligence and future tech to change the outcomes on the battlefield. The story was written in parallel with one that I wrote last year that appeared in World Breakers called World Enough. In both of these, we see an artificial intelligence or a synthetic intelligence being used in the battlefield. They have a common thread regarding the sacrifices that ordinary people make in war. It's a dark place, but we use the science and the technology to make it better. So ultimately, I see Mother as being hopeful. And on that note, I hope the readers do too.
So look, there's an example where, who is the female character? Well, there's the AI, right? That's sort of having failed the soldiers. It's a very poignant story. Having lost the battle with the soldiers, the AI then finds a new female, right? The AI itself is Mother, but then the next generation after the soldiers who are interned in a concentration camp, right, basically get rescued, or at least we understand they're rescued by this young woman and Mother, who is the AI in the tank. A lot of fun, very, very kind of poignant.
Yeah, it was a pretty intense story.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the stories are quite intense. I really enjoyed Sharon and Steve. I really enjoyed yours. Now, this is a Liaden story, right? So we probably a lot of people very excited besides me to read this. Yeah, maybe you can tell us about your story.
It is a Liaden story in that it takes place in the Liaden universe. The Liaden universe is a big sprawling place with lots of it featured it's actually the backstory of Cassagari and Mickelson, who is a dealer in information in one of our books. And this is how Cass got to be Cass.
The reason that I think the reason that we came to that, Sharon had been wanting to follow along, to actually figure out how he got here. And this is part of the joy of working in a universe the way we do. We can go back and forth and we can look at things afterwards and say, how did they get there? And still have a way of tucking the story in. A number of the stories that we've had published in anthologies have actually been that. They've been fill in the blank. Somebody would say, whatever happened to the taxi driver? And so then we'd have to we wouldn't have to, but we would take up the challenge and do that. So in this case, Sharon had an idea and said, well, we need a tank top, right? And that sort of started to build the story. We needed a tank top someplace that not everybody knows about, and from there.
And we had I had also been toying, as I do from time to time, with various religious orders, and actually Angel came first, I think, in the story. I knew I wanted to write a story about Cass, but Angel also was the first voice, the setting for the story. The story's name is Gadriel's Folly, and Gadriel is one of the many angels or demons who has been blamed for giving men or teaching men the arts of war. So, and since Gadriel was an angel and we had a cathedral, I thought, why not? Sister Mechanic, we'll do that.
So the Sister Mechanic, the Order of Sister Mechanics was invented for the story, is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
her order was invented for this story.
No, very, very cool. So, so tell us a little about the story. You have two principal characters. One's the mechanic, and then I guess Cass is the soldier who is sort of the slightly AWOL hero who has to get rebuilt at the beginning, right?
Well,
Cass-
AWOL
Cass was
AWOL is
a
unkind.
librarian.
AWOL is unkind.
Yes, he just didn't really have clarity on his orders.
Yeah.
And he's an information broker, a librarian, and his head is stuffed full of all kinds of things. And at some point in his previous pre-soldier life, he had come across a schematic for this particular part of grinder that is bearing down on him and his compatriots. And he manages to disable it. And the very first thing he says when he wakes up, as so many Weird Universe heroes say when they first wake up, is, "It worked." And Angel is tasked with, or Angel decides to put him back together. She has an option when he's brought in, which is either to let him go or to rebuild him, and she decides that she needs to rebuild him.
Yeah.
Or build him.
In this case, in this case, the Order of the Angels has a contract. Pardon me, has a contract that's not entirely religious. It's partly what can we do? What can we do for the Force? And if she had felt that his leftovers from his own prior mechanical self were more valuable than having his whole body there, she would have had the right to go through and say, okay, he's done, we'll pray over him and go on. But she had made that decision in part because he was in fact a hero.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it's not a slam dunk, right? It's not, I mean, he's badly hurt, right? He has to be sort of built. In fact, I'm not an he's an organic, right? Like he's a biologically human, but basically he becomes a cyborg. The rebuilding means he gets a synthetic body, basically, right?
He is in fact a cyborg. About the only thing, as Angel notes, about the only thing that's left of him that's actually any good is his head.
Yeah.
All of the rest of him has to be rebuilt and augmented and rewired and rejuiced. I don't even know. But he is a cyborg, yes. And he's when we meet him in The Gathering Edge, he is a broker in information, a cyborg, a broker in information at a place called Edmonton Beacon.
Yeah.
And he collects old manuals on how to fix turrets.
And he collects old manuals on all kinds of things and he's thus a source for anybody who finds an old weapon or a part of a weapon that they think they might be able to bring back. If they have to bring it back, they go to him and say, do you have any of these? It's like, do you have the fire for this or that? Do you have the manual that will tell me how to put this in? Do you have? And that's where he has survived in the distance, himself not being human. And he has found a location that not being very human in any case. And he's found a location that permits that in a space station where as long as you do the job, they don't care what you look like.
No. Well, this is good. You're talking about the character as we see him in books that are chronologically later, although you've written them
much later.
Yeah, you've written them earlier. Tell us, for the benefit of people who have not already read. Now, I'm asking you this is a Herculean task. How many Leiden books are there? It's over 20, right?
The 25th will be published in July.
Okay. So summarize the series for us. Tell us about the series, right? Because this is a backstory to one of these characters who we meet in the book. So what's going on in this universe? Like who are the grinders? What's the sort of short description of what this series is about?
When we first started on the universe, I came home from a chess match, and Sharon had been working on the story all day long, and there was a sentence on the page. The only part of she had filled up a trash basket in our old typewriter days, and with the starts of this story, and the sentence she had was very simple sentence. And she said, I'm afraid I have a novel here. And I looked at it and I said, no, I'm afraid we've got a series. And
we were Pikers, we had 7 books. We've gone on with that. Let's see, once there was a solid state universe that the enemy was trying to turn into crystal, and a bunch of people escaped the solid state universe into the Liaden universe. And so all of the adventures began. The Liaden universe is vast and it is space opera. It loosely follows one family called Clan Clerval, but it also branches out into other avenues as the writers have ideas. The good thing about working in a space opera universe is that almost anything goes. You can have grinders, you can have sister mechanics, and you can have love stories, mysteries, and action adventure. So we just basically set it up so we have this venue where we can whatever story we feel like telling today.
And we started off with the intention.
It's not a series, actually. So,
yeah, we started off with the intention of not focusing on the future. It was not intended to be a predictive universe. It was a universe where we could play, and it was a universe not of exactly mainstream USA. We were trying to work out of the backgrounds that we've shared in terms of books that we enjoyed, and so we wanted something that had a little bit of feel of the Regency romances.
Oh,
because we wanted there to be flowing language and those kinds of possibilities. And what happened to us is that once we got into the universe, we discovered there were all these rules and all these reasons to get your head cut off, and you had to be really careful. If you annoyed the wrong person, he'd shoot you in the foot and then hit you in the back of the head. I mean, and that was everybody would say, well, of course. So that was one side. The quote unquote Terran side, which would be more recognizable perhaps as from an English speaking background, a US background, if you will, we're mostly off on the side. And what we do then is we put these groups, they're already in conflict with themselves simply because they're like the English aristocracy of Georgette Hare. But they're also then in conflict with these other people who would be more the ruffians from America.
Yeah, fantastic, a lot of fun. And book 25, what's the title of book 25 that comes out this summer, later this year?
Book 25 is book 25 is Salvage Right.
Salvage Right.
And it takes place on Tensori Light.
Fantastic.
It's a direct sequel to Fair Trade. Is it not?
No.
Not.
I'm working on the right now.
Okay.
This is how things happen. It happens about the same time as Fair Trade, or a little after Fair Trade, but the characters in Fair Trade do not show up, except by letter, I think, in Salvage Right.
Yeah. Fantastic. And now we actually have guides that set this kind of stuff out on the website, but if you were going to recommend a starting point in the series? As someone said who said, "Oh, this is interesting. I like space opera. I like the idea of the kind of Regency space opera." Wow. What would your ordinary recommendation be for the first book to read?
Well, the first thing I ask is, what do you like to read that's not science fiction? If someone likes Regency romances, I say Local Custom and Scout Progress and Mouse and Dragon. If they like action adventure, I say Agent of Change. If they like coming of age stories, I say Fledgling.
Okay.
So there are several doorways into the Leiden universe.
Now, there is also a place on the web that our fans have put together called the Leiden Wiki. And if you go to the Leiden Wiki, has 238 pages, I think, or something like right now. But if you go to the wiki, there are lists of the books, and there was at one point several lists of people's recommendations of how to get into the universe, depending on what you want. So, but the Leiden Wiki is one way in.
Yeah. Fantastic. So sorry, go ahead. Oh, I thought I was talking over someone. In terms of this story, then, what happens is those two end up sort of being left to defend the cathedral, and we see kind of the battle play out. And I won't give any spoilers, but it's a lot of fun. Is it fair to say this is an action adventure story? Like, given those categories, there's definitely a romance element.
It's
I don't think of it as being an action adventure story, but okay.
Okay. So how do you think?
There is a battle in it.
Yep.
I think of it as two people getting to know each other under very bad circumstances and learning to work with each other, and then making the decision of what are we going to do when push comes to shove. And we have our orders, but are we going to actually take our orders this time?
Yeah.
And that's very much a lot of the Leiden universe stories have to do with partnership and collaboration and people working together for the best of the group. And so that's where that falls for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I like to, there's a couple of points you guys have touched on, give us nice links to other stories. You talked about Regency era romance. We have another story in the collection that is a Regency romance.
Esther's story.
Yeah. Oh, if you read it, why don't you tell us about that one? We'll take some of the burden off Jason. Oh, yeah. Okay, Jason, it's all you then, I'm afraid.
For which one?
Tell us about Esther's story, which is Regency romance. I mean, it's not even just Regency romance; it's Jane Austen, right? It starts
It's
out
Jane Austen.
basically quoting Pride and Prejudice.
It's a wild ride. She takes Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, throws in I don't even have a proper title for it. It's like an Estherism. Is that a word? It's a word now. Estherism. And she makes this beautiful, amazing, crazy story work. And I had to read it twice when she submitted it. She's like, here's my story. And I read it the first time and I actually said out loud, what did I just read? Go back and read it again. I'm like, okay, that makes you have to read it twice because it's just that fun of a story. And there's a lot packed into a small space, which I love short stories that do that. And that takes a certain skill level that I definitely don't have yet, but Esther's mastered. So it's Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, open up the 9 gates of hell, fighting capybaras with the love interest who's not the love interest, and I literally can't talk about it without spoiling the whole story.
And tanks.
It has tanks. It has a
right?
tank in it. Yes.
The chicks in question are the 4 daughters of the family.
Yes.
Right, I mean, it's Pride and Prejudice,
Yes.
and Lizzie in particular has a hobby of tanks. which we discover early on when she whistles and a tank responds like a dog and comes out.
It was fun. It was a great story, and it's like it has that lighthearted seriousness to it. It has adventure, romance, a lot of building up to the relationship building, and it's like I said, there's a lot to unpack in that story.
And it's definitely at the humorous end.
Yes.
Humorous, kind of gonzo, over the top, tongue in cheek from the first word to the last. A lot of fun.
Yes.
But also on religious orders. I love this. You guys served up nice slow pitches on the subject of religious orders, right? Phil Woolrab has a story which starts out with Sister Mary Catherine sitting in her tank, which is a pretty provocative image. Why, Jason? Why is Sister Mary Catherine in a tank?
Well, it's part of their order. They are there to defend a small village along with a holy hospitaliers. I can't
Hospitalers, right? She's got a bunch of infantrymen who are basically future post-apocalyptic Crusader knights.
Yes. And that's pretty much what this is. It's post-apocalyptic Crusader knights, nuns with guns, as Philip said when he told me the story, and he turned it in. And basically, they're trying to save a small village from this barbarian Mad Max-like horde coming in, and they've got a massive big rig that's armed to the teeth. They've got their own little buggies, and it's just a straight up action adventure with the religious order doing everything they can to hold off this attack and give the people time to leave. Yeah.
And there's a nemesis who's I think her name is Mafion or something, but she's basically pretty brutal. We get a pretty graphic kind of human sacrifice scenes to underscore
right out the gate.
No question who's the good priestess, the good nun, and who's the villain, right? And that's what it is. There's these two female religious leaders kind of facing.
And Philip did an amazing job portraying the good and the evil and how they're conflicting and what their conflicted reasons are. Like, the sisters are there to protect the people. She's there to gather the villainess is there to gather more sacrifices for her gods.
Yeah,
and it's such a good yin yang fight. Well, not yin yang. Balance, counterbalance. English is not my first language.
This is very, very clear opposites, right? They're foils. Yeah. Yes. So, Marissa, I'm going to make you wait longer. I want you to you're the cleanup hitter here. And Jason, I want to talk about your story, but first, you kind of hid something from us. You said I wrote a fantasy story and Huggins wrote a fantasy story, and that's all the fantasy stories in the anthology. You left out David Drake.
Oh, I didn't count Drake, that as fantasy.
David Drake, really? Hold on. There's like goblins in an airship, which is powered by they have like a dragonette, like a baby dragon, and they like irritate it somehow. I forget what they do to make it fight the cold. What do you mean it's not
nobody fantasy? Tell David Drake I didn't think his story was fantasy, okay?
He's coming for you,
Nobody tells him. He's never gonna know.
But he's got two, right? So how do you end up with two? What's the background? Are these reprints? Like, did you know these stories already?
What happened was David turned in a really fun story, and it was Airborne: The Next Mission. I was like, that sounds like a sequel. That's weird. Read the story. This is definitely a sequel, but I've never read this story before. Oh. So I had to hunt for it, and I found it that we published it in the first story in 1996. And Gallows, all the way to the Gallows. It was a collection of David Drake short stories. And I saw them, and I went to Tony Weisskopf, and I was like, Tony, these stories need to be together. Can we get the reprint rights for the first story so we can have the sequel and have them together? And she said, yes, do it. So went to David, asked him if we could do both stories. He said, sure, yeah, I like getting paid. So So yeah,
Reasonable.
it's a story of the dog goblins, smart, dumber than number three, smart.
Right.
It's fun. It's quirky. The way the goblins attack is they fly into the air in these like hot air balloons, and they deliberately crash them into the opposing
Well, they try to
side. But
drop
they're also
rocks.
throwing rocks at them.
But they can't hit anything with the rocks, right?
No, they're horrible
It's
shots with the rocks.
comedy. It's comedy because the goblins are incompetent idiots, right? And what all they
Well,
want
they're
is
not
to really go
incompetent.
down and bite people. Which
They're not incompetent. They're just not
they
smart.
can't hit people with dropped rocks. They can't hit massed formations of troops with dropped rocks.
Oh, they start getting
Dumb.
creative when they run out of rocks, though.
Well, at one point they throw the thaumaturge overboard. Yeah. So yeah, again, so there's some comedy. But okay, all right. Tell us about your fantasy. Now you co-wrote with Ashley Pryor.
Yes, Ashley Pryor. First time story she's ever. She's a YA author who's just getting her feet wet in publishing, and I actually coached her son in baseball for Little League, and we got to talking, and she found out I was an author. She's like, "Oh, great, that's great. So am I." I was like, "Yeah, okay, cool, whatever." I hear that a lot, so it's like, "Oh yeah, cool, you're an author, great." And then she said, "Well, I want you to read my story." So I read her book, and I was like, YA is not my thing, but this isn't bad. I like it. I'm enjoying it. It's got a good plot, good story. I like the main character. And then it came time for the stories to come in for Chicks, and I realized I haven't written a story yet. Oh boy. I asked Ashley, "Would you like to write this with me?" And she said, "Sure. Do you mind if it's silly?" Well, this is me, so yeah, go ahead. So she said, "Do you like Beauty and the Beast?" And I was like, "Which version?" So that's where we kind of spiraled from there. But in the end, I think it was a really fun story about Belle.
So it's the Emma Watson version, right?
It is technically it's the literary version that was officially published. Therefore, we do not get sued for.
Okay, all right. Although it is the case that the villagers like sing about things.
That's why she complains about it. There's no reason on God's green earth why they should be up at 8 a.m. singing about the day.
Singing their
no. 9 o'clock at the latest.
Yeah. So Beauty and the Beast. The Beast is her tank.
The Beast is La Bête.
La Bête.
La Bête.
The tax man wants to marry her.
Yes.
She said, "Well, that's interesting. You know what I'd like for a betrothal gift is a mortar." He said, "That sounds good," and gives her a mortar. So she has a tank and a mortar, and then the story is about how the betrothal is ultimately resolved.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
There is a resolution.
There is a resolution. Comedy, Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
Very, very, and like Esther's story, very kind of knowing comedy, right? I mean, there's, yeah. So,
it was written all tongue in cheek. Ashley has a wicked sense of humor, and I just was along for the ride on that part. So
yeah. All right, let me talk about one story. I liked all these stories, but let me just talk about one, and then let's get Marissa. Marissa's been waiting very patiently. And we have so many exciting things to say about Marissa. But I also want to say exciting things about G. Scott Huggins, who wrote kind of a fantasy, kind of a historical novel. So the title is Jeanne d'Arc et Tonnerre, and which echoes sort of Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc. And the Jeanne here is really Giovanna. She's a Florentine girl who's born. She's crippled. She has from birth bad legs, right? And but great everything else. She's very smart and very bold. And she sort of becomes an apprentice to Leonardo da Vinci. And so the sort of context is defending the city of Florence against the
Cardinal Borgia.
Well, it's the Duke. It's Cesare Borgia, right? Who's the Duke of
Right.
Milan, who's related to the Pope.
Right. I was confused.
And the backstory is that Cesare Borgia blinded Leonardo da Vinci when he thought basically he was giving da Vinci's he was giving technological secrets to Borgia's enemy rather than to Cesare Borgia. And so the story is about revenge, right? And the fun conceit is that, of course, Leonardo da Vinci like left us cryptic designs for all kinds of stuff, including tanks. And Da Vinci's tank is called La Tartaruga, the tortoise. And in the story, there are 5 of these tortoises, and they're basically steam powered, or at least the weapon is steam powered. It's a steam powered cannon that fires a giant wooden flechette, and it's about going into battle with these 5 tanks to take revenge on Cesare Borgia. So yeah, a lot of fun. I don't know if technically it's fantasy. I the tanks might work. I don't know.
Alternate history, maybe?
It's at least alternate history. That's it's definitely not straight history.
Yeah.
All right, Marissa, I've been torturing you. We could talk about 5 more stories and then come back.
You can talk about all these stories. They're amazing. Yeah.
So tell us about your story.
Yeah. My story is called Next Question. And the conceit in that one is the way they get sentient AI is by overlaying it in part in a genetically edited human's brain. So that's how you get an AI that can tell the difference between kill these people good, kill these people bad, is by bonding them with a human. And so you meet Talon and B on their very first assignment. They've been in training their whole lives.
B is the AI.
B is the AI.
Talon Rees, right?
Yes.
Is the woman.
Yes, Talon Rees. So they're breezy together because, you need a call sign.
The B for B and her name, right? This is we got a couple other characters who have similar.
Yep. It's a trend. I mean, you figure these soldiers have been raised together since birth, so some of their humor and practices might be pretty immature. And you actually meet them in the middle of their pre-assignment games, which is getting as roaringly and appropriately drunk as humanly possible the day before everything gets real for
They're
them.
new graduates, and they are
Very
living
new.
it up.
They are. So that's how you meet them. So she's very hungover for her official assignment, in which B becomes a tank. So B, the AI, is loaded into the tank. They are now a tank pair for ground assault, defense. And you follow them on their first assignment when everything goes horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. And it turns out it's more horribly, horribly wrong than they could have even imagined. And so there is a definite end to the story and a resolution of what happens there, but I could not stop thinking about what happens to them afterwards. So without spoilers,
it's like science fiction tinfoil hat military industrial complex kind of stuff.
A little bit.
Right? Yeah. So okay, so that's interesting. So something that maybe not everybody watching this knows about you yet. This will air like in January. Is that you have a book coming out with us?
I do.
Congratulations! Very exciting.
Thank you so much. I'm a little bit giddy, and by a little bit, I mean excessively fangirly giddy about it.
You'd be giddier if we paid you a lot of money, but you're a little giddy.
I mean, to be clear, I'm a fair-sized giddy. And
okay, all right.
I mean, no, not like a come on, baby author here, guys.
My experience is that the truest thing I've heard yet in science fiction publishing is Kevin Anderson's promise that you might make dozens of dollars.
Dozens. It's amazing.
So
I mean,
tell us about the connection. Tell us about the story and the book, and
Yes. So one, outsized giddy still regardless. So I currently live in an RV, so I don't have a ton of books that travel with me. They're mostly in storage, but many of those books are full, or those boxes are full of Baen books. So I will be outsizedly giddy about being able to hang out with really talented, amazing storytellers like some of the folks on this call right here. So it's all of you, Jason. Stop pointing. All of you. So the short story ends. Talon and Bee have found some things out. It is conspiracies all the way down. And then 40 years later, because nothing happens fast when you discover conspiracies, more things are happening. So the novel will pick up with a different version of main characters. I know we give more away, but you will see Talon and Bee again. They are trying really hard to upend the issues in the universe, and they're finding that to be trickier than expected for many reasons. So it's a whole novel for that.
So do you, to some extent, genre is very artificial, right? But like, nevertheless, do you see this as sort of military sci-fi? Do you see it as more space opera? How do you see like the genre of the novel?
Yeah, it's more space opera than military. Like the military is there, in that it exists, and that's why we've got tanks, and it's why we've got these AIs hosted in human brains. But the conspiracies go beyond the military, as they would have to. And so you pretty quickly get dumped out of the military conceit into the broader galaxy, and all of the sideways things happening there.
Okay, so Breeze, we wouldn't expect to see Breeze investigating through the tools of the military hierarchy or whatever.
Correct.
It's gonna be kind of a bigger lens.
Yeah, they're sort of out on their own. Like they've got some friends, but it's a big galaxy, so they've got a lot of time on their own. And so it's a good thing when you get an AI in your head, because you're never alone until things happen, and then you have to operate in ways you are not prepared to operate.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the delightful story in the anthology, and congratulations, huge congratulations on the book deal. That's really exciting.
Thank you so much.
Are you gonna? Do you think there'll be sequels? Does it depend?
There's always the hope.
There's the hope.
So the novel will definitely end. I'm a big believer in this is a full story, and Tony was very clear about that also. So the story will definitely end, and there's always another level, right? So there's more happening in the galaxy that they'll figure out as they're going through, and I would love for there to be another book, but we will see how it goes.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. All right, very, very cool. Jason, I think there's 5 stories we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
What if we take turns and try and summarize them in like 30 seconds each? Is that too breezy? I don't want to give anyone short shrift. They're all a lot of fun. Why don't you pick one and tell us about it?
Okay, Kevin Anderson's Hold the Line.
Kevin Eichenberry.
Yes, said Kevin Anderson.
We like both of them, but they are different.
We love Kevin Anderson, but we're talking about Kevin Eichenberry.
We also like we also love Kevin Eichenberry. He is amazing.
Yes, we do. Wow, Kevin's going to kill me for that.
Not the same person.
So Kevin Eichenberry has a story called Hold the Line, where there's a tank commander and her, I guess it'd be a brigade of tanks, maybe a regiment of tanks. I do not know Army terms. I was Navy.
Kevin does. He was Army.
Yes, he was a tank commander.
Is Army, I think.
Yeah, he is Army, and he was a tank commander.
Yep.
And basically, they're holding against was it the Ripper or the Swarms?
They're insects. What are they called? The buzzers. The buzzers.
The buzzers. I was like, it has something to do with that. Yeah. The buzzers, and they disobey orders in order to hold the line and save their valley and position from being overrun when the aliens attempt a flanking maneuver. And it's a really, really intense battle, starring the tank commander, her unit, and them just literally getting fed into the grinder to stop this alien assault.
Yeah. The commander basically disobeys her order to just stand the ground to rescue her scout, right? And so there's sort of a classic. I mean, there's some commonalities there with Sharon and Steve with your story, right? The individual choosing to maybe creatively interpret, what they were told to do, and then taking the personal risk on that.
Yeah.
Creative interpretation is key to survival.
Yeah.
Creative interpretation is key to survival. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Jody Lynn Nye's got a great story about detectives. Dina Malone and her partner is the Detective Sergeant Ramos, and they are investigating smugglers, and it turns out to involve aliens. And there's just a little funny personal note here. The main character is carrying she's carrying a symbiote in her abdominal cavity, her peritoneum, which I read a little too fast when I read the first paragraph the first time. I thought, what? That's a really weird place to carry an alien. Then I looked back and said, oh no, sorry, it's in her belly. All right, got it. So there's some comedy, some kind of buddy cop banter in there, but mostly this is basically a kind of a police detective sort of story. I like the detective is she has a symbiote alien, and she is also pregnant. So there's kind of an interesting contrast between those things. All right, Jason, we got 3 left.
Aaron Haskins, or I'm sorry, AC Haskins, delivered another Tank Commander story, and it was very interesting because he wrote this before the war in Russia broke out.
And he's
And
also a tank guy.
the war
right?
in Russia.
Isn't he also personally a tank guy?
Yeah, he was as well. He was a West Point grad who was a tank commander as well, and he wrote a story about a war in Russia, an Eastern European country. Sorry, which may or may not involve Russia and the Ukraine. And he wrote this well before the current conflict.
Well, no, it says Russia. It says Russia and Ukraine.
I was trying to give him the benefit of it. I don't
We're
know.
trying to avoid the Chinese reading this recording or something and getting
Well,
into
you know, it's some weird website.
Near China fiction. The fictional story about tanks. All right.
So Goddess of War is actually the cover story as well. His tank commander and his tank is on the was the cover of the book, and it's a lone tank. It's separated from their unit when they break down, and they suddenly are deep behind enemy lines and all alone, and conflict comes up and there's fighting, and they get rescued by a very interesting turn of events at the very end of the story. But it's a tank commander and her crew alone against multiple enemies, trying to engage them and keep themselves alive while they're in a damaged vehicle.
Yeah,
and it's a pretty intense story. It's very, very, very military, hard military bent.
Yeah, they're playing dead. There's an attack helicopter, and they set off smoke grenades to try to look wounded, right? And then basically when the Russians advance beyond them, they have the ability to sort of get in a really hard surprise attack despite being disabled.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of choice they face. So yeah, a lot of fun. All these guys with like actual military experience. I have to make stuff up. I'm envious, I guess. All right, Joel Presby's got a really fun story. I can't remember the title of the story, but there's a tank named Ken, and
Ken,
the tank,
Barbie and Ken versus the Hurricane.
Yeah, and Barbie is a National Guard sergeant, or she's the National Guard. So I guess maybe the question here is being asked is, hey, what do you do with the tank when the military is done with it? And the suggestion of the story is, well, maybe you can put them to use in disaster situations. So basically, Barbie is driving her tank Ken around, clearing up traffic, rescuing motorists who are causing trouble because they're not part of the electronic autopilot grid, and their fancy car is now stuck, rescuing EMT teams. Etc. So it is about a tank operator on a disaster scene, driving around rescuing people, including, and she's dressed in scuba gear. She has like scuba apparatus because one of the things they anticipate is she might have to drive underwater, and at one point she does. She goes. It's that set in Norfolk, and at one point she goes into the river with the tank, knowing she has X number of minutes of oxygen in her breathing apparatus. So a lot
if
of fun.
anybody's driven in Norfolk, they understand those tunnels in any kind of storm, you're not getting through.
Yep. All right. Hey, one last story, Jason. Tell us about
Operation
the
Dad Liberation
Yeah.
by Lydia Shearer and David Shearer. Actually, the husband-wife duo teamed up for this one.
Scandal.
It's post-apocalyptic, I think.
Certainly
Texas or New Mexico. It's a little vague. And basically, our star of the story, her dad was arrested and tried and convicted almost immediately of espionage and court-martial, pretty much. And she hijacks her dad's AI sentient tank to go rescue him, but she has no idea what she's doing. So she manages to manipulate the AI of the tank through a little bit of sneaky, teenage reasoning that the AI couldn't really fight against. And they go ahead and they go and try to rescue her dad while navigating their way through pretty much a wasteland where there's nomadic tribes going around ready to destroy anything. They have to fight through a barricade at one point where there's armed guards with rocket launchers, and the tank says, "We're not equipped to deal with this, but we have this gun."
Yeah. A lot of fun.
It is.
So, hey, thank you all for joining us. I don't want to cut off any comments. Somebody's got any last observations they want to make before we wind up? I'm happy to.
I had a blast doing this. Everybody turned in great stories, and I've heard a lot of editors say doing an anthology is like herding cats. If this was herding cats, these are the world's best behaved cats, because I had no issues. It was great. It was easy. I want to do this again because it was that easy.
Oh, fantastic. All
Thank
right.
you, Jason, for inviting us. It was a very interesting challenge.
It was an interesting challenge to be able to say, okay, and I'll have to put it this way, with Esther in the background at all times, knowing that Esther was being part of it is an amazing thing. Anyway, this, I think, is probably the first or maybe the second time we've been in an anthology with her, and she's just a great person and a great source. And I'm sorry she couldn't be with us tonight, because she's just such a joy to work with and talk to.
Yeah. I told Tony Weisskopf when I was doing this, I was like, I'm not going to do this without Esther's approval and permission first. So.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much. Again, the book is Chicks in Tank Tops, out now in trade paper and all your favorite ebook formats. And Sharon, Steve, Marissa, Jason, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the Trofts did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
McDonald's call came in late in the afternoon, just as Johnny was looking over his pantry and trying to decide what to have for dinner. Sorry about the delay, McDonald apologized after identifying himself. I was out in the forest near the river most of the day with my phone turned off. No problem, Johnny assured him. Spine leopard hunting? Yeah. Got one too. Likewise. Must be another migration. They don't usually find the territories we've cleared out quite this fast. We're probably going to be busy for a while. Well, things were getting dull anyway. What's on your mind? Johnny hesitated. There could be a good reason why Challenor didn't want any word of his meeting going out on the airwaves. Did you get any unusual messages today? He asked obliquely. Matter of fact, I did. You want to get together and talk about it? Wait a second. Chris is trying to get my attention. A voice spoke unintelligibly in the background. Chris says you should join us for dinner in about half an hour, at her place. Sorry, but I've already got my own started, Johnny lied. Why don't I come over when I finished eating? Okay, MacDonald said. About 7C. Afterward, maybe we can all go for a drive together. Challenor's meeting was scheduled for 7:30. Sounds good, Johnny agreed. See you at 7. Replacing his phone, Johnny grabbed a package at random from the pantry and took it over to the microwave. He would have liked to have joined the others for dinner. MacDonald and Chris Eldjarn were two of his favorite people, and if Chris's father hadn't been out of town doing emergency surgery, he would have jumped at the invitation. But Chris and MacDonald were a pretty steady couple, and they got little enough time to be alone together as it was. With only 2 Cobras to guard Ariel's 460 colonists from both Aventine's fauna and occasionally each other, spare time was at a premium. Besides which, he thought wryly, spending more time in range of Chris's smile would only tempt him to try and steal her away from MacDonald again, and there was no point in making trouble for himself like that. Their friendship was too valuable to him to risk messing it up. He had a, for him, leisurely dinner, and arrived at the Eldjarn's home at 7 o'clock sharp. Chris let him in, treating him to one of her dazzling smiles, and led the way to the living room, where MacDonald waited on the couch. You missed the great dinner. MacDonald greeted him, waving him to a chair. I'm sure you made up for my absence, Johnny said blandly. Half a head taller than Johnny and a good deal burlier, MacDonald had an ability to put food away that was known all through the district. I tried. Let's see your note. Digging it out, Johnny handed it over. MacDonald scanned it briefly, then passed it to Chris, who had curled up on the couch beside him. Identical to mine, he told Johnny. Any idea what it's all about? Johnny shook his head. The Dewdrop's been out surveying the nearest system for the past couple of months. Do you suppose they found something interesting? Interesting as in dangerous? Chris asked quietly. Possibly, MacDonald told her, especially if this news is really only for Cobras. But I doubt it, he said, addressing Johnny. If this were a war council or something, we should all be meeting at Capitalia, and not Thanksgiving. Unless they're passing the news out piecemeal to the individual villages, Johnny suggested. But that again drops it out of the emergency category. Incidentally, who brought you the message? Almo Pyre? MacDonald nodded. Seemed awfully formal, too. Called me C2 MacDonald about 4 times. Yeah, me too. Has Challenor instituted the old rank system over there or something? I don't know. I haven't been to Thanksgiving for weeks. MacDonald glanced at his watch. I suppose it's time to remedy that deficiency, eh? Let's go see what Challenor wants. Come back after it's over and tell me what happened, Chris said as they all stood up. It could be late before we get back, MacDonald warned as he kissed her goodbye. That's okay. Dad's coming home late too, so I'll be up. All right. Car's out back, Johnny. Thanksgiving was a good 20 kilometers east-northeast of Ariel, along a dirt and vegebarrier road that was, so far, the norm in the newer areas of the human beachhead on Aventine. MacDonald drove, guiding the car skillfully around the worst of the potholes, while avoiding the occasional tree branch reaching out from the thick forest on either side. One of these days a spine leopard's going to jump a car from one of those overhangs and get the surprise of his life, MacDonald commented. Johnny chuckled. I think they're too smart for that. Speaking of smart moves, you and Chris to the point of setting a date yet? Not really. I think we both want to make sure we're right for each other. Well, in my opinion, if you don't grab her while you've got the chance, you're crazy. Though I'm not sure I'd give her the same advice. MacDonald snorted. Thanks a kilo. Just for that, I may make you walk home. Challenor's house was near the outskirts of Thanksgiving, within sight of the cultivated fields surrounding the village. 2 other cars were already parked there, and as they got out and headed for the house, the front door opened, revealing a slender man in full Cobra dress uniform. Good evening, Moreau. MacDonald, he said coolly. You're 20 minutes late. Johnny felt MacDonald stiffen beside him and hurried to get in the first word. Hello, Lest, he said, gesturing to the other's outfit. I didn't realize this was a costume party. Simon Lest merely smiled thinly, a mannerism whose carefully measured condescension had always irritated Johnny. But the other's eyes showed the barb had hit its target. MacDonald must have seen that too, and brushed silently by Lest without delivering the more potent blast he'd obviously been readying when Johnny stepped in. Breathing a bit easier, Johnny followed his friend in, Lest closing the door behind them. The modest-sized living room was comfortably crowded. At the far end, on a straight-back chair, sat Torres Challenor, resplendent in his own Cobra dress uniform. At his right, looking almost drab in their normal work clothes, were Sandy Tabor and Barl Deslone, the two Cobras stationed in Greensward. Next to them, also in dress uniforms, were Hale Sintra of Oasis and Frank Petruski of Thanksgiving. Ah, MacDonald and Moreau, Challenor called in greeting. Come in. Your seats are right up here. He indicated the two empty chairs to his left. I hope this is really important, Challenor, MacDonald growled as the two men crossed the room and sat down. I don't know what things are like in Thanksgiving, but we don't have a lot of time in Ariel for playing soldier. He glanced significantly at the uniforms. As it happens, your lack of spare time is one of the topics we want to discuss, Challenor said smoothly. Tell me, does Ariel have all the Cobras it deserves? Or does Greensward, for that matter, he added, looking at Tabor and Deslone. What do you mean deserves? Tabor asked. At last count, there were about 10,000 people in Caravel District and exactly 72 Cobras, Challenor said. That works out to 1 Cobra per 140 people. Any way you slice it, a town the size of Greensward ought to have 3 Cobras assigned to it, not 2, and that goes double for Ariel. Things seem reasonably calm at the moment in Ariel, MacDonald said. We don't really need any more firepower than we've got. He looked at Tabor. How are conditions around Greensward? Firepower isn't the issue, Sintra put in before Tabor could answer. The point is that we're required to do a lot more than just guard our villages against spine leopards and falks. We have to hunt down wheat snakes, act as patrollers in domestic squabbles, and if we have any spare time left, we're supposed to help cut down trees and unload supply trucks. And we get nothing in return. Johnny looked at Sintra's flushed face, then at the other 3 uniformed men. A cold knot was beginning to form over his dinner. Ken, perhaps we should get back to Ariel, he said quietly to MacDonald. No, please stay a while longer, Challenor spoke up hastily. C3 Sintra was a bit more forceful than necessary. But stuck all alone out in Oasis, he perhaps sees matters more clearly than some of the rest of us. Let's assume for the present that he's right, that we don't get the respect we deserve, MacDonald said. What solution are we discussing here? It's not simply lack of respect, or even the way we always seem to be taken for granted, Challenor said earnestly. It's also the way the Syndic's office takes forever to process the simplest requests for equipment or supplies, though they're prompt enough when it comes to picking up surplus wheat and glühwein extract when we have it. They seem to have forgotten that the whole planet isn't as comfortable as Rankin and Capitalia, that when a frontier town needs something, we need it now. Add to that the mania for making lots of little frontier settlements instead of consolidating the territory we've got, which is why we're spread so damn thin, and you get a picture of a government that's not doing its job. To put it bluntly, we feel something has to be done about it. There was a long moment of silence. What do you suggest? Deslone asked at last. That we send a petition to the Dominion with the next courier ship? Don't be denser than you have to, Barl, Tabor growled. They're talking about replacing Governor-General Zhu themselves. Actually, our thinking is that more than the Governor-General needs changing, Challenor said calmly. It's painfully clear that the centralized system that works so well once a world is established is failing miserably on Aventine. We need something more decentralized, something more responsive to the planet's needs. Governed by those who do the best job, Johnny cut in. Us, for instance? In many ways, our struggle to tame Aventine is analogous to the guerrilla war we waged against the Troughts, Challenor said. If I do say so myself, we did a hell of a job back then, don't you agree? Who on this planet could do better? So what are you suggesting? MacDonald asked, his tone far more interested than it had any business being. We carve Aventine into little kingdoms, each one run by a Cobra? Basically, Challenor nodded. It's a bit more complicated than that. There'd have to be a loose hierarchy to settle disputes and such, but that's the general idea. What do you say? Are you interested? How many of you are there? MacDonald asked, ignoring the question. Enough, Challenor said. The 4 of us here, plus the 3 from Fallow, 2 from Weald, and 3 more from Headwater and the lumber camps upslope of the Cursiage mines. You propose to take over an entire world with 12 Cobras? Challenor's brow furrowed slightly. No, of course not. But I've talked to a lot of other Cobras, both in and out of Caravel District. Most of them are willing to wait and see what happens with our experiment. In other words, to see how hard Zhu comes down on you when you declare independence. MacDonald shook his head. Your thinking's got loose connections, Challenor. No Cobra's going to be allowed to stay neutral in something like that. They'll be ordered to come here and restore the Syndic's rule, and their answer to that order will put them on one side or the other. With the odds at, let's see, 12 Cobras out of 620 makes it about 50 to 1. Which way do you think they'll jump? Which way are you jumping, MacDonald? Lest cut in suddenly from his seat by the door. You ask a lot of questions for someone who hasn't committed himself yet. MacDonald kept his eyes on Challenor. How about it, Challenor? This is going to take more than an ace or 2 up your sleeve. I asked you a question, damn it, Lest snapped. Deliberately, MacDonald turned to face the other. Just as leisurely, he got to his feet. I stand where I and my family have always stood, with the dominion of man. What you're talking is treason, gentlemen. I won't have any part of it. Lest was on his feet now, too, standing sideways to MacDonald in a Cobra-ready stance. The loyalty of an Earth Scot or a fine dog, he sneered. In case you haven't noticed, Earth Scot, this dominion you're so eager to please is treating you like dangerous garbage. It's thrown you just as far away as it possibly could, with 150 light years and 200 billion troughs between you and civilization. We're needed here for the colonization effort, Johnny interjected, wanting to stand in MacDonald's support, but afraid the action might be misinterpreted. In such close quarters, an all-out firefight between the 2 Cobras would probably be lethal to everyone in the room. That's donk-dung, Moreau. We're here because it was cheaper than starting a new war just to kill us off, Lest ground out. The Dominion doesn't care if we live or die out here. It's up to us to ensure our own survival, no matter what sort of short-sighted fools get in our way. You coming, Johnny? MacDonald asked, taking a step toward the door. Lest took a step of his own, putting himself directly in front of the door. You're not leaving, MacDonald. You know too much. Take it easy, Simon, Challenor said, his tone calm but with steel underlying it. We're not giving these gentlemen a choice between joining us or death. Lest didn't move. You don't know this clown, Tors. He's a troublemaker. Yes, you told me that earlier. See to, MacDonald, please understand that we're not doing this simply for our own personal gain. Challenor's voice was pure sincerity. The people of Aventine need strong, competent leadership, and they're not getting it. It's our duty to these people, these citizens of the Dominion, to save them from disaster. If your friend over there doesn't get out of the way, I'm going to have to move him myself, MacDonald said. Challenor sighed. Simon, step aside. MacDonald, will you at least think about what I've said? Oh, I'll think about it, all right. With his eyes still on Lest, MacDonald moved toward the door. Carefully, his attention on the still-seated Petruski and Sintra, Johnny got to his feet and followed. If you'd like to stay, Moreau, Challenor called after him, we can get you back to Ariel later. No thanks, Johnny said, glancing back over his shoulder. I have some work I need to finish up tonight. All right, but think about what I've said, all right? The words were friendly, but something in the tone made the hairs on Johnny's neck tingle. Suppressing a shiver, he got out fast.
that was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Jason Cordova, Rob Hampson, Marissa Wolf, and Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David Asharirod coming to you for the last time in 2022 from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next year at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.